So, in keeping with my paranormal theme, I want to touch on um, a very specific case that was mentioned in the documentary that I recently posted, Ghosts of the Underground. Now, if you still haven't seen that documentary, maybe you want to stop right now and not watch this video, because I am going to talk in some detail about one of the cases I feature in that. And in my opinion, it's one of the most interesting cases, not only of that documentary, but of paranormal phenomena in general. It's one of the strangest things I've ever come across, and I'm yet to see any sort of outcome to this. There have been other high profile cases that have subsequently been solved. Just to give an example of that, and I'll just touch on this briefly before I get to the main point. The Wem girl ghost. That was basically the ghost purporting to be of a young girl in the small town of Wem in Shropshire, England. It was taken during a fire in the town hall in the 1990s, I believe. Um, and it was purported to be the ghost of a young girl who died in another fire in the town in the 1670s. But someone discovered a local postcard of a girl in Edwardian dress from the 1910s, and it was exactly the same girl. So clearly, this was, if not a forgery, then something didn't quite add up with that. So it certainly wasn't the ghost of a 17th century girl. Although it has to be said that the person who originally took the photo vehemently denied that he had used that postcard, but it was basically exactly the same girl. Um, yeah, so that's just an example of how some cases do get outcomes. So I think when talking about paranormal issues, we should always have a shred of skepticism. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Nor do I necessarily go along with the school of thought that it's everything can be explained. I really, really do believe that there are some things that just don't make any sense, no matter what way you look at it. Whilst there's always a strong case for skepticism, there are some cases that simply cannot be explained with solid evidence, that is. So I believe this is such a case. Basically, they feature this case. I forget which line it was. I believe it was the Bakerloo line of the London Underground, although somewhat frustratingly, I've forgotten now the line. But anyway, if you look at that documentary, they talk about this at length. It's about two-thirds of the way through the documentary. But basically, a woman from Watford, Karen Collett, took this picture on the London Underground in 1983 of her young nephew. And basically, nothing exceptional about the picture, just shows a young guy and a child, a young boy, sort of smiling happily and on the other side of the tube. There's sort of wooden paneling because this is quite a while back now, so it's obviously one of the older tube trains. But the notable thing about this photograph is that seemingly behind the glass, behind the little boy, is an image of a man in the electric chair. Now, this is just staggering. Why the hell would there be an image of a man in the electric chair in the London Underground? Um, a few things make absolutely no sense about this. Not only is it seemingly out of place, if you're going to see an apparition of someone who's been executed, presumably it would be in a prison, if anywhere, or at least a castle or something like that. Secondly, although we had the death penalty in the United Kingdom until 1964, we never ever used the electric chair. It was briefly considered actually during the war by Churchill. There was very briefly plans to execute Hitler that way. But anyway, the point I'm making with that is we never in our history used the electric chair as a device. In Britain, the punishment was always death by hanging. That was always the main common law punishment. Um, but research later found that, well, Karen Collett herself visited Madame Tussauds, the famous wax museum, a few weeks later, and she came across a wax figure of Bruno Hauptmann. Now, if you know anything about the Charles Lindbergh case, of course, the famous aviator, his infant son was killed, and it was a massive, massive story at the time. he was a German American who was executed for the crime. But right up until his last breath, he vehemently protested his innocence. In fact, I've just watched a rather creepy interview with him behind bars where he basically appealed to the American public, I am an innocent man. It's a little bit unsettling seeing that because, bearing in mind this case. Um, and there has been significant doubt on the Hauptmann case. I don't know much about the proceedings of the trial, so I can't comment in detail about why there's significant doubt, but needless to say, Hauptmann has himself strongly protested his innocence until the end. Karen Collett then went to speak to a medium, but she thought this was very strange. The medium says that they were followed by a man who said that he was executed for something that he hadn't done, but he had done something else. This is very strange. I'm not sure if that indicates that Bruno Hauptmann had been a petty criminal for other offences, or if that's referring to someone else. It really doesn't make sense. Now, the interesting thing about this case is if you look at it firsthand, the image of this man being executed is Bruno Hauptmann, but it isn't a photograph of the actual Bruno Hauptmann. It's actually an image of the wax sculpture in Madame Tussauds. So the inevitable follow up to that would be, well, it's obviously some sort of poster. And this is the most common theory that's been put forward for this. Um, and that's particularly because in the image you can clearly see sparks coming from the hands. So it's not a static image, it's an image of sparks coming from the man's hands. Um, it looks like it's outside the window, like it would be in the tunnel itself. One theory that's been put forward is this is actually the reflection, because there wouldn't be a poster in the middle of a tunnel. That makes no sense, because no one's going to see it when a train is going at high speed. Um, so the logical follow up is that it must be a poster on the other side, i.e., the side that Karen Collett was at, and it's just a reflection of that. That seems to be the most logical explanation. Now, Madame Tussauds claims that they never had a promotional poster at the time. They were featuring this waxwork of Bruno Hauptmann. I believe I went there in the early 90s, but I can't remember that. I remember seeing all the Jack the Ripper stuff, but I don't remember the Bruno Hauptmann statue. But I've seen pictures of this in the museum, and indeed it is exactly like the image in the picture, except the real statue doesn't have sparks coming out of it. The real waxwork, I should say. Um, there are a few notable things about this. A few analysts in the program spoke about this case, and they said there was a photography expert, and I think he mentioned that the important thing to take into account is that this was a very basic camera. It was 1983, so there's no high level digital cameras, and it would have been a lot harder to tamper with photos back then, in terms of Photoshop and so on. And this is 33 years ago now. Um, so that's an important point to take into account. And if that is the case, no one has ever asked Karen Collett, no one's ever sort of put her on the spotlight and said, have you tampered with this or anything like that. Madame Tussauds claim that they had no promotional material at the time. Now, I will say one thing just to play the devil's advocate here. Madame Tussauds is an attraction that basically caters on being sensationalist. So it is very plausible that they're just going to say that because they want to make a story out of it. But let's say, for the sake of argument, this is a sort of big giant fib that Madame Tussauds had. They did have a poster, and they just didn't bother telling anyone. There's a few issues with that. Number one, they can't keep a secret for 33 years, not like that. At some point, someone's going to find that poster. Also, if that's the case, then why is there no other documentation of a poster in other parts of the underground? I mean, if you're going to mass produce a poster for the purpose of promoting a feature, you're not gonna make one poster. You're gonna put it all over the system. Anyone who's been in the London Underground will see that any sort of West End shows or anything like that, it's not going to just be in one station. It will be all over the place. I was in London last year, and the Homecoming was a show that's being featured quite recently with Gemma Chan. It was in every other station. The point I'm making is if If a company or a tourist attraction is going to promote something, they're not going to do it in one station. I don't know if she used flash or not in the camera. If she did use flash, then perceivably and ostensibly you would see some sort of reflection from the flash. So presumably the lighting was quite good because it's quite a clear image, and she just didn't take the flash. The other theory is that this was some sort of film advertisement, and there was a film actually at this time called Shocker, horror, and the promotional poster for Shocker does indeed show a man in the electric chair. However, that's quite different from the image in the picture because the promotional picture for the film Shocker, the man in the electric chair is quite fat and he's in an orange boiler suit. In this picture, it's a man in 1930s clothing, kind of working class clothing, very much like Bruno Hauptmann. So nothing about this makes sense. Morris Gross, who passed away recently, was interviewed in the program, and he I think he kind of actually someone erroneously says that he made the theory about the poster, but it was someone else. Morris Gross himself, who's a parapsychologist, was a parapsychologist, I should say, said that it makes absolutely no sense. Of all the cases that is featured in that program, this might well be the strangest. And to me, it makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, all the theories that have been put forward, it's a poster. Well, where are the other posters? It's a film advertisement. Which film? Nothing about this makes sense. The only other theory that it comes down to is that this woman, Karen Collett, is a fraudster, a liar. But then, what would be the purpose for it? As far as I know, she didn't get any money for it. So, nothing about this case makes sense. It's 33 years on since that photo was taken. I'm yet to see anyone offer any explanation for that. And why on earth would an American killer be seen on a transit system in another country? It makes no sense. Nothing about this makes sense. As far as I know, Bruno Hauptmann never visited London. Charles Lindbergh did a few times in terms of his promotional side of his aviation, but nothing about it makes any sense whatsoever. So, if you're not familiar with this case, check out Ghosts of the Underground just for the reasons I previously mentioned. It's a very interesting documentary, but pay particular attention to that case. And there's a few forums about this online. To me, it makes no sense. To me, it's a lot stranger even than the expressionless case, because with the expressionless, that only emerged recently. Whereas with this, the photo is from 1983. I'm yet to see someone offer any kind of basis for what this was. Um, I don't know if Karen Collette has followed up on this, if she's made any more interviews or spoken to anyone else since that documentary. Documentary itself was 11 years ago, so I haven't seen any sort of articles in local newspapers or anything like that with Karen Collette being interviewed. But you know, um, I don't think it's quite fair to just assume someone's a liar. It's kind of like slandering them without really knowing. But it is a very strange case. The only caveat I would say to this is that an attraction like Madame Tussauds is known for being sensationalist. So it might well be a very clever, elaborate promotional thing they done. Maybe they only did do one poster for precisely this reason. But it still poses a question, why is Karen Collette the only person who saw this? No one else saw this poster or even this image. Um, Unfortunately, I forget which line this was taken on, and that kind of irritates me now because that could have some significance. In terms of the other cases they feature in that program, the lines or the stations all have significance to the case that they're documenting. But with this, makes no sense whatsoever, except it might be near Madame Tussauds. I don't know. Have a look at that documentary or have a look at the case. Let me know what you think. Cheers.